My name is Major Raashid Williams. I've served in the United States Army for 12 years now. I have been serving as Mr. Ammar al-Baluchi's Detailed Defense Counsel for a total of 3 years, and I'm going into my 4th year now. One of the interesting ironies about the type of work that I'm doing right now is I'm a military defense counsel by title and by profession at this point. And in order for me to do my work and meet with my client, I have to have a security clearance. But when I speak about my work, by virtue of the fact that I'm a security clearance holder, I also have to make this disclaimer. As a security clearance holder of the United States government, the ideas and the thoughts that I'm going to express right now are my own. They are not thoughts and ideas or positions of the United States government. I'm speaking specifically as an advocate for Mr. Ammar al-Baluchi. Does everybody understand that now? Okay. When I give remarks about Guantánamo, I usually like to do it in 2 phases. The first phase is sort of the policy or 50,000-foot view of what Guantánamo is, where we are by way of policy, politically, militarily. And then I also like to bifurcate that and do the second phase, which is I want to take the numbers that I quote to you, the quantifiable numbers that I give you, and relate those to actual human beings who are detained and who have been detained in Guantánamo for over a decade now. Specifically, I'm going to tell you about Ammar and what he's been dealing with for the past 9+ years at Guantánamo. First, let me just tell you one thing. When it comes to my work, one of the things I try to do is I try not to take my work home with me. I try to leave the work of being an advocate for Mr. al-Baluchi at home, but I find it impossible. One of the things I do a lot is I like to read in my spare time, Washington Post, New York Times, USA Today, and even the Huffington Post to a degree. Those are my go-tos for reading in the evening. But especially during this holiday period where I've been trying to kind of decompress a little bit, I've noticed that there's been a lot of activity in the media discussing Guantánamo and what's been happening there. Specifically, there's been a large number of transfers out of Guantánamo in the past couple weeks. Specifically, what I'm referring to is a couple articles out of the Washington Post that talked about the fact that President Obama has increasingly within the past 2 years now specifically, but before that, he's been trying to whittle down the numbers of people who are detained at Guantánamo Bay. And those transfers come in drips and drabs and 2s and 3s, so on and so forth. Within the past week, there have been 3 people that have been transferred out of Guantánamo Bay. So right now, from a quantitative standpoint, the number of people detained at Guantánamo Bay stands at 104. 2 Yemenis have been released or transferred to the country of Ghana, and Ghana has recently offered to accept up to 17 detainees within the coming months. So that's going to be the largest one-time transfer that we've seen in some time. It's almost a transfer wave, if you will. But of that 104, approximately 46 have been cleared to be transferred out of Guantánamo since almost 2009. So that's been 5 years since they've been determined that they can be released, or at least transferred to a degree they can be rehabilitated, but they certainly don't meet the threshold to remain at Guantánamo Bay as a detainee. That's 46 people who've been waiting 5+ years now. Recently, Mr. al-Kandadi, he was the last Kuwaiti transferred out of Guantánamo Bay, the last of 12. Some of the other interesting news that have come out of Guantánamo Bay is that, anybody read Reuters here? Okay. There's been an interesting article that came out on December 28th, states that the Pentagon thwarts Obama's efforts to close Guantánamo Bay. So he's made some pretty public statements, the president has, that he's been trying to either close Guantánamo Bay or at least whittle down the numbers. But This article, in pretty excruciating detail, points out that every time there is a protracted negotiation to get a detainee transferred to another country, there's a number of steps that have to take place. They have to negotiate with the gaining country. They have to do an assessment of the people that they are going to receive, determine if there is the possibility that they would quote unquote return to the fight, and whether or not they have the security measures sufficient to monitor and rehabilitate them. That usually requires some type of visit, some type of release of medical documents and things of that nature. Now, what this article states is that consistently and systematically over years, the Pentagon has been slow to move on a lot of these things. They've been slow to move on the visits, to allow the visits, and to even release certain documents citing HIPAA violations and things of that nature. But one of my favorite quotes from the article says, "Closing Guantanamo might be the president's priority, but it's not the Pentagon's priority, nor is it the priority of the people in this building." Another quantifiable number I want to give you is that under President Bush, 532 people were transferred out of Guantanamo Bay. Under President Obama, in 7 years in office, 131 people have been transferred out of Guantanamo Bay. And hopefully that's 131 and counting. Now, of those 104 people that are still detained at Guantanamo Bay, all of them have been in Guantanamo for over a decade now. Of that 104, the actual numbers of convictions are in the single digits. Think about that. If that was a conviction rate of any prosecutor's office anywhere in the country, that prosecutor would have been fired a long time ago. Those conviction rates are abysmal, and a lot of those convictions don't stand up to appellate scrutiny. Now, that's the number, 104. My client, Amar, he's been at Guantanamo Bay since September 6, 2006. He's been in United States custody since 2003. The whereabouts of his incarceration between 03 and 06 are not publicly releasable. How he was treated during that time frame also is not publicly releasable. But what I can tell you about his time in Guantanamo Bay is that as a detainee there, his treatment has gone through cycles. And when I say cycles, I'm talking about cycles of re-engage mental trauma over and over again. One of the interesting things about Guantanamo is that it's a military base by its very nature. It's owned, it's operated by Joint Task Force South, which pretty much operates the southern portion of the country going into South America and so on and so forth. But in any military operation, you get a new command structure almost every 2 to 3 years. So with the new command structure, what you also get is new policies and procedures. What that also means is sometimes whatever liberties detainees were given under the old regime now shrink. And then they expand, and then they shrink. So what that does to the psyche of detainee is that you never know what you're gonna get. If the guard force switches out every 8 months, if the old guard force was great, that's great. But you know that a new guard force is coming in 8 to 10 months from now, and they might not be so hot. So I want to talk specifically about two things as it pertains to Amar's confinement conditions and the confinement conditions of detainees in general. Guantanamo Bay, the best way I can describe it is legal outer space. The Geneva Conventions, or the protections under the Geneva Conventions, don't apply to these men at Guantanamo. The Constitution, for instance, the right against cruel and unusual punishment, and by cruel and unusual punishment, I'm referring to being detained for over a decade without a specific trial date set yet. cruel and unusual punishment and any other constitutional protections, they don't reach down to the detainees at Guantanamo Bay. They arguably don't apply according to the prosecution. Privacy, the right to privacy, the right to free speech. Those protections also don't get down to Guantanamo Bay. And I'm going to cite you some specific examples about that. So, if Amar was a prisoner of war, for instance, he would be entitled to a number of protections under the Geneva Conventions. Some of those, quite simply, are POWs are allowed to intermingle with other prisoners, right? You've seen some of the movies where, guys have been locked up and they're POWs and they're out in the yard, but they're talking to the people that they've been detained with, right? Well, in Guantanamo, that's not possible. Well, that's not allowed. And that's not allowed for security reasons, because the idea is somehow that if mass commingling occurred between certain people, they may conspire to do something from behind the walls of Guantanamo Bay. So one person may not necessarily be compared with another person, but certainly these people aren't able to get together en masse. They can't go out to the yard and play basketball or soccer or anything like that. If they do, their rec time is pretty restricted, right? But that also has some grander effects as it pertains to the culture and the religion of these detainees. They also can't pray together. They also can't eat together communally. Another protection of POWs, those protected under Geneva Conventions, is family contact, right? Under Articles 35 and 41, POWs are at least offered some degree of family contact within a reasonable time of being captured. And that contact can be direct. Hey, I can write a letter. Hey, I'm not dead. I'm a POW, but I'm not dead. Something to that effect. Amar has not been allowed to contact his family directly since 2003. They know he's around. You can communicate through third parties, i.e. the ICRC, but he can't talk to his mom or his uncle or someone like that and say, hey, not doing too hot this year. It's been a rough year. That doesn't occur. And so these are basic rights that the international community has deemed appropriate, and not only appropriate, but necessary and obligatory for people who've been captured in a POW status. But the men who have been detained at Guantanamo Bay aren't even entitled to that status. They're entitled to the status of unlawful enemy combatant, which basically means under the rubric of protections under the Geneva Conventions, they don't even measure up. These are the protections, they're somewhere down here. They're not entitled to anything. And the policies at Guantanamo have only exemplified the fact that they're not entitled to certain types of protections, liberties, and or rights. And I'll give you this last example because I'm now down to 5 minutes. Actually, I'll give you 2. And this falls under the umbrella of right to counsel. Counsel is allowed the opportunity to directly contact their client. We can't talk to Amar on the phone. We have to physically hop on a plane, fly down to Guantanamo, and meet with him for a limited basis. And that's as close as we can get other than letters, which if you think snail mail is slow, mail going to Guantanamo can be remarkably slow. I mean, it literally has to be handed to a person who then has to drive it over to the facility and then go through another procedure, has to be given to them. So communication is very difficult. Now, mind you, Amar is facing charges at the military commission with an ultimate punishment of death. He's facing a death penalty, everybody. and he can't contact his lawyer on the phone. Just think about that for a second. From a policy standpoint, may seem like a small thing, but it actually turns out to be a fairly big thing. And I'll close with this policy change. Last year, the Joint Task Force changed the policy down in Guantánamo. There used to be a time when we met with our client, we could actually bring in food to them. We could prepare meals, have a little taste of home, if you will. If we got something from Kuwait or the halal market or something, we could prepare it and bring it in. And that was an important cultural thing for us, where Amar could essentially host us, if you will. And we could have a meal, we could sit down, gather around a meal and have dinner and talk. And it had a rapport building process. That, for the years that I've been there, was the policy. Last year, that policy was changed to the point where now we can't bring anything in there but tea and coffee. That's it. And so the ending result is that process that we have of meeting, talking about business that is of a very serious nature when you're talking about the death penalty. There is no levity left in the meeting because we now are no longer able to bring him food and bring him a certain degree of comfort that I think Amar appreciates, and certainly some of the other detainees down there have appreciated. Instead, what happens is that whatever meal he is given by the guard force, his only alternative is he shares his meal with us. So whatever dinner he had, he now has to split it up amongst the people in the room meeting with him. And so that, in a number of ways, changes our dynamic, changes the tone of our meetings. And let's be honest, Amar goes back to his cell a little bit hungrier than he otherwise would had he not met with us. And so when we talk about humanization, a lot of times what Amar likes is for us to get away from the mass policy perspective of Guantánamo. I used to give this speech all the time called Guantánamo by the Numbers, and I talk about how much money we spent on Guantánamo and everything else. But the reality is that there are human beings down there right now. Men and women, husbands, brothers, fathers, and they are detained for going on decades now without really an end in sight. Some of the low-value detainees, they may be transferred to other places, but for quote-unquote high-value detainees like Amar, I'm not sure when or if he's able to ever get out. And I just want to point out one thing. He's 1 year younger than me. I'm 39. Got my whole life ahead of him. And he's a young man. And some of the things that he's suffered in the custody of the United States government, very difficult to talk about. But more importantly, kind of accordion effect of policy changes that occur only reinforce the suffering, the trauma that he's already been through. And I will close with this new bit of information gleaned from the Washington Post the last couple of days. United States military sharply cut the use of psychologists at Guantánamo Bay, citing new rules set by the American Psychology Association. So the psychologists who were employed to provide some type of mental health care to detainees at Guantánamo Bay are now no longer allowed to do that by virtue of the American Psychology Association. So whatever trauma Amar has dealt with or continues to deal with, there's no mental health care for him now. The best he can get is maybe a sergeant who's got some experience in counseling, something like that. But professional help, he's not able to get that anymore by virtue of a new shrinking policy that provides Amar with less than he had before. So this is what I want you to take away from what I'm telling you today. The dehumanization kind of has a grand concept really manifests itself in slight ways. They manifest themselves for these detainees in the change of guard force, the change of demeanor of some of these guards, the change in demeanor of the command that oversees the facility, the policies that are implemented that they were accustomed to before that now they have to adjust to over and over again. This is how dehumanization occurs. And this is how re-traumatization occurs for people who have not yet been convicted of anything. I want this to understand that. There has been no conviction. We're still in pretrial litigation. And so all of this technically, if we're under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, would constitute pretrial confinement for which the detainee would get confinement credit on the back end were he to ever be convicted. But we're not even close to a trial date yet. We don't have one set. So all of this since 2003 is pre-trial punishment. And the injustices that continue to occur day after day are occurring to actual human beings. So when you see these articles in the paper, realize that it's a human being down there dealing with this. And the ramifications of it are very, very serious for Amar and for a lot of the other detainees that are down there. So I thank you, on behalf of Amar Abaluchi, for being here tonight, for hearing me speak, and for understanding a little bit about his humanity here tonight. Thank you.